Welcome back to another segment of Boldly Now. My name is Rachel Morrison, and we have the absolute joy to be with a dear friend of ours, Samantha Sweetwater. She is a executive spiritual coach and a ceremonialist and a deep systems theorist of our times. And she's had just profound insight on what's happening here in the world today, in the ancient futures that we've been referencing, and has a really keen insight into all of that. And it's just such a joy to welcome Samantha to the space. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome. It's really a delight to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. So I got to ask Samantha, let's just dive right in. What's lighting you up these days that you are so excited to share with us?
Oh my goodness, so much.
All right.
I feel the place to start is really in the tenuous balance right now between short-term imperatives and long-term vision. Mm-hmm. And the thing that's been lighting me up a great deal in the last week has been around how truly imperative it is that every single one of us anchor in our own version of the viable, thriving, just, reciprocal, regenerative, ecologically exquisite, technologically coherent future that we want. And that is something we can build starting right now, both from the quality of the relationships that we build that are both anchored in our own personal freedom and also in collective well-being, and in being very clear about what we steer towards and what we don't. And I've been very present to how this situation in its heat increases the tendency to just choose based on the next step. And that's one piece of the genius that's being called from us. And the other, I feel, is to hold this very delicate and exquisite timeline of a future that is the one within which humans are co-generative with nature. And I had a dream the other night that a very powerful dream. I was on a different planet, a different Gaia. There are many Gaias in the whole of the universe that all manifest the same patterns of complex life, similar patterns of complex life to planet Earth. And this particular planet had a species on it that was almost exactly identical to humans, which is rare. I've been to other planets that don't have that. And in this dream, I was walking side by side with this strong, ancient woman, female, named Sophia. And Sophia, as some of you may know, Sophia is the name given to the feminine principle of wisdom as it flows through the material, like the Divine Mother and all that is created. Wisdom being a function of the harmonics, like the omniscient harmonics of the created world. And so this woman's name was Sophia, and we were walking side by side along a seawall. There was a village that was tucked up along this seawall, and then the village ended and the seawall went forward into a point that went way out into the ocean. And there were beautiful trees on this point that looked kind of like the baobabs of Madagascar, but they were adapted to the ocean, and it was just an exquisite place. And as we walked out to the end of this point, a massive storm came up. And we kept walking in this very stately way in full presence with this storm. And we walked all the way out to the end of this point and stood and like communed with the storm. And the storm continued. And at a certain point, like she psychically signaled me to come back to the land, come back to the shelter. And we walked very calmly back, and she communicated with me these words. The civilizing impulse of true humans is to harmonize the forces of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that sentence, I woke up with that, from that dream, with that sentence in my space as a koan, of this perfect koan of, firstly, the civilizing impulse of true humans, not just any humans, but true humans, is to harmonize the forces of nature, not harmonize with, but to be so elevated that we can be in communion with the forces, such as to harmonize with them. And then the implications of that civilization isn't really civilized until it is doing that. And to me, that's the long view, like that single koan, the civilizing impulse of true humans is to harmonize the forces of nature. That perfectly describes the long view of what I see possible for our planet and possible for our species. And so I'm pretty lit up about that. Yeah. I'm also hugely lit up about the social justice issues that are playing out in our collective right now in a very, very gritty way. And that, you know, anyone who is conscious right now, I think that there's a huge burden of responsibility for those of us privileged enough to have time, energy, resource, and voice to pay attention to how the kind of in the backdrop of a lot of the very loud things that are playing out has a social justice backdrop that's incredibly significant. And that if you want to understand what's going on, this has been an insight for me in the last week, but if you want to understand who's really, like, whose interest is really being served, not necessarily who's pulling the levers, but whose interest is being served, and whether the interest of people is really being served, to pay attention to how it's playing out racially in our country shows you a lot about what is the better thing to do. And in that, I'm finding that I'm leaning into particularly the voices of African-American leaders and people of color leaders to see how they're seeing things play out, because like that's where my alliance matters. Because I feel like we really are at a cusp moment in terms of how we play this as a country, and that one of the keys to playing a more to the next stages unfolding in a more omni-considerate way is doing everything we can to ensure that racial justice is served in the healthcare sector, in the elections, and in many other ways, in the food space, in education space as well. So that's something I'm also very focused on right now, is that anyone with the privilege to voice and influence needs to really pay attention to that, because we can walk in a deeper kind of solidarity right now if we're willing to pay attention. Otherwise, we're just squawking about constitutional rights in a way that is not really meaningful. That's my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's so interesting that a lot of our conversations in this time have been around connecting back with nature and doing these pieces. But, you know, can we also do whatever it takes for us to connect back into each other, mm-hmm. and experience these moments of separation as an extreme to what we have done over the last millennia or so? And what can we do to bring us back into union with each other as we go back into union with all of life again after this? That's a really, you know, it seems like a simple no-brainer. Yeah, of course, that's what we should be thinking. But reality check, if you look into any of these voices that you're, you know, suggesting we lean into to get some synthesis of information, there's a drastic discrepancy there.
Mm-hmm. Drastic. And there has been for a very long time. Our country is not built on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people. Mm-hmm. but if it is worth protecting, it is worth protecting for all people, and for real. And, you know, in terms of the work I do as a ceremonial guide, it's like that is about access for all to nature and to sacred medicine. In terms of some very difficult things facing our country. And I'm guessing this is an international listenership to this this broadcast. So, you know, I speak as an American from a place where I'm a bit aghast at my own polis, not proud to be an American at this time, but committed to what healing needs to be done in this country, because it's healing that also needs to be done all over the world. And you know, if anyone is here calling themselves a spiritual warrior, that it is time to show up in solidarity, because we can't get to a world that works for all without healing the embedded injustice and embedded inequality and embedded trauma that is in our system. And the way it's playing out in this scenario is really stark. And further, you know, the further in that, there's globally, and particularly in America, we're living in a massively broken information ecology. But tracking where the reporting is actually showing us what's playing out in reservations, in populations of color, in inner cities, gives us a better idea of where the power is actually moving than a lot of things do. So it's also a very potent place to put your attention.
Yeah, so I've got to ask you this, because I've actually thought about it in the few months that I've been kind of catching some of your posts recently around, you know, this cycle. I've thought to myself, man, she's really taking a lot of time to make sure she knows what she's talking about, right? Like the level of study that you're committing yourself to, I think by standards of most people, is unprecedented. And so first of all, thank you for caring enough to have an actual opinion that matters, right? Second is, how did you and how have you gotten past this like level of like information anxiety and like the emotional connection to the things that you're reading to be such a good student that you've made yourself to be?
Oh, that's quite a question. I mean, there's a number of layers to it. One is I'm just practicing a lot of patience with myself. Two is I'm not posting anything from a place of confusion, and I'm not asking for opinions on Facebook. Facebook is not a dialogic space. It's just not. It's not a place that I think one of the things that we're all participating in a sickness when we put really unprocessed things on social media. And so that's a significant factor for me. And it's also a significant factor about where I steer my attention and where I don't. I lean into a few advisors and fellow thinkers who I really trust. And then I expand that into a couple circles that are much more diverse, where I don't necessarily agree with everyone there, but where the playing rules are they are mature enough, both intellectually and emotionally, where the group can hold charge when charge arises. So it's like safe for someone to be upset or angry or confused. But also that we aren't going to make choices or decisions on the basis of those triggers. But that we're going to keep digging. And I guess there's a couple other pieces. I don't feel invested in being right. I think that is actually one of the pieces of dissolution of cultural ego that we're being invited into, is the position of needing to be right to provide value. Like the culture really encourages a stance of expert, and then we get identified with being an expert and defended about whether we're being right or not. And I think the degree to which I'm able to hold that makes it a lot easier, one, for me to do research, and two, for me to put things out there and then also be open to dialogue. I've also gotten really good at moderating conversations on my page and choosing what, that there is a bottom line at some point where someone is showing up in a way that feels fundamentalist to me that I don't have patience with. But that they have a strong opinion is valid. And, but not that they're being bullies to other people. That's not okay. So those are difficult gradients, of course, but patience is a really big part of it. It's also about time management in an interesting way of really being cognizant of when I take in information and how much of it, and then when it's worth putting more time aside to do research on something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm gonna get into this just another layer deeper, about the commitment to the study of gaining that wisdom, that Sophia wisdom.
Right.
And looking at things that hurt, right? Like if you were to feel into it and feel into the connection of oneness of what these people are actually experiencing in whichever storyline you want to choose. How do you push through that and into a place of continuing to read and not just click away?
One of my mentors worked side by side with Mikhail Gorbachev for a long time. And Mikhail Gorbachev was adamant that the only way to create viable solutions to difficult problems was to face all the pieces rigorously. And I am also a student of Hannah Arendt, who was a great critique of the Nazis, amazing social theorist. And she said she spoke to how rigorously we have to think our way through things before we act. And so I've had good teachers in regards to keeping my eyes open and my heart open. I think that, but I think that my passion for vital, thriving, more omni-considerate solutions is what keeps my eyes open. Is that I'm aware, painfully aware, that I have my own biases. I can't change that I live in Marin County. I can't change that I have white skin. I can't change my own history, with all of its challenges and gifts. But I can pay attention in a way that is really rigorous and really unflinching. And then when I need to pause and grieve, that is what I do. And but ultimately, like, I think there's deep lessons in grieving. I think there's a phase in owning our grieving where we actually need to be overtaken by it, and it's not designed, that time of grieving is not creative. But then I also think that there's a place at which we become, I'm trying to feel the right word is, almost established enough in the circuit of grieving and mature in that. And also, like, I'm 47, where we've seen enough that it's not as surprising. It's more like, okay, bring it, because I'd rather make solutions based in truth, based in the best possible consideration of reality that I can possibly muster, than based in my own optimism or idealism, or which doesn't ever have as much traction anyway. So there's a place at which grief becomes the fodder for more love and celebration, and that's a very quick circuit once you kind of get to that place. And another one of my teachers, Linda Tucker, who's the keeper of the White Lions in South Africa, when I first worked with her, we had kind of an argument over that, and she said, no, grief is my motive. It's my motivation for staying persistent, consistent. And I couldn't understand that at that time, but I feel like I'm starting to understand that. And it's this place where, Martine Prechtel says this, and I really experienced this, that true grief is praise. And it's also, the way I see it spiritually is that true grief is when you truly grieve, you release the mana, you like release the intelligence of the thing you're grieving back into collective consciousness to be recirculated as praise, as love, as new information, as new life. And so, you know, I feel in some ways like I am a human. I can only do as much as I can do, but to the degree that I can be a seat of where that toroid is constant, where it's a fluid motion of receiving information, processing it intellectually and emotionally, doing my best to steer action and messaging from there, and, you know, being open to both the emotional circuiting of it, that there's overall, there's a lot more aliveness and joy there. And there's also this kind of genesis, that generativity that's really motivating. I have a sense we'll all go through many cycles of that, and much more complex understanding of grief as we, not just as we navigate COVID, but as like, this is just the start. This is just the start. So we need to get of a lot of change, regardless of what that looks like. There's going to be way more changes coming. So this is a practice run.
Yeah, definitely. This is a big space of preparation for what's to come, whether it's the privileged assumption of rest during this time for the world that needs to be built after this hibernation of some sort, or whether it's the drastic measures that some people are going to have a visceral experience with their own survival to build the capacities and the stamina that are going to turn them into the warriors that they've been destined to become. In closing, Samantha, you know, we're going to do it. It's going to happen. How it ends up and is anybody's guess, you know, really depending on, you know, what vector you focus on. But what do you see after this cycle? What do you see in the big vision being realized? And what do we have the potential to move into together if we transcend some of those suggestions of vulnerability that you touched on in our time together, that we can go through?
I see many possible timelines, but and I also don't see an end. But I see what I feel is most relevant right now is that individuals and organizations, organizational leads, organizations as organisms have the ability right now, have more power than we think to steer ethically in ways that are vitally nourishing for people and ecosystems, that are win-win both on the supply and the consumer level, that actually follow precautionary principle in ways that are wise. I think I see the potential that we move towards a world, that we arrive in a world where business is a force for good, where people are safe, happy, well, and fed and cared for medically, and children are educated in a way that is embodied and connected to nature and connected to relationship, where technology is used very mindfully to help us be a global interconnected civilization and to revitalize the diversity of our ecosystems and our agricultural system. And where we truly have this deep-seated sense of our individual sovereignty being absolutely non-separate from our interconnectivity, from our interbeing, with each other and with nature. And I mean, many teachers have argued that the fundament of our transition is consciousness, and in so many ways that's true. I also think like that circuit as it moves in time is almost, it has no, there's no disconnect from the material to the consciousness. It's like, it's constantly circuiting. So in every decision we make, we have an opportunity to make that consciousness manifest. And in everything we make manifest, we have an opportunity to drive that consciousness forward. So I just feel that it's right now, the most important thing is that we own our capacity in every interaction, in every purchasing choice, in everything we say no to, in every story we tell, to both cause the consciousness and the new systems, stories, and the things we don't do anymore. You know, to lean on Joanna Macy, there's 3 categories. There's new systems, there's new stories, and there's the things we got to stop doing. We've got to stop polluting our watersheds. We've got to stop taking away all the things that create carbon, blah, blah, blah. It's a long list. But that every single one of us can run this circuit really actively right now. And then we're already there and we get there. So that's my vision.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your vision, your insights, your heart, and all of your magic with us. I really feel like in some way you might be that Sophia woman in your dream coming to visit us in this strange, almost humanoid planet to share what you've learned from the ancient teachers. So thank you so much for being with us, Samantha.
It's a joy. Thank you, Rachel.
Absolutely.